Of all the places in the galaxy, he never expected to find himself on Velithar Prime, navigating the winding, bioluminescent streets of its capital. The air smelled of sweet mineral rain, tinged with the faint spice of alien cuisine drifting from vendor stalls. Neon script pulsed across storefronts, advertising goods he couldn't pronounce. Towering above it all, crystalline spires hummed softly in the artificial twilight. This was a world of trade, alliances, and delicate social contracts, ones he barely understood. Nathan Cade, interstellar contractor and occasional courier, had only meant to pick up a shipment and leave. Simple. Clean. But fate had other plans. He spotted her near a marketplace archway, an elderly Velithari woman hunched under the weight of multiple bags, her translucent violet-tinted skin dimmed with strain. She was small for her kind, her head frilled with soft, white tendrils that trembled with each shaky step. The crowd moved around her, offering no assistance, their golden eyes flicking toward her burden and then away, unreadable. Nathan hesitated. He knew better than to interfere in alien customs. Some cultures saw unsolicited aid as an insult, an implication of weakness. But as her foot caught on the uneven stone and she lurched forward, instincts overrode caution. He closed the distance in 2 strides, catching the heaviest of her bags before they could spill across the ground. She startled, glancing up at him with those deep, glassy eyes. "Oh," she exhaled, voice like wind chimes in a storm. Then to his relief she smiled. "You are kind." "It's nothing," Nathan said, adjusting the bags in his grip. They were heavier than he'd expected, filled with something dense and metallic. "Where to?" Her frilled tendrils quivered again, a slow ripple of emotion he couldn't decipher. "My home is not far." She motioned ahead and he fell into step beside her. The crowd parted as they passed, eyes lingering a second too long. The murmurs began soon after, soft clicks, hushed tones, the universal language of people watching something they did not expect. Nathan frowned but kept walking. "You did not have to do this," she said after a moment. "Would have felt wrong not to." Her gaze lingered on him, unreadable yet somehow heavy. Then she nodded, satisfied. "You are a rare one." A quiet walk stretched between them before they reached a dwelling carved into the base of a great spiraling crystal. The entrance shimmered with an ornate sigil as she stepped forward and gestured him inside. He hesitated. Stepping into another's home, especially in an alien society, could imply all manner of unintended meanings. She must have sensed his reluctance. "It would honor me if you shared tea," she said simply. A minute, maybe 2, and he could leave. He nodded and stepped inside. The interior was warmer than the city outside, the walls pulsing with gentle amber light. He set the bags down near a carved stone table and straightened to find her watching him, not suspiciously, not warily, but with something that prickled his nerves. "You are far from home," she observed, moving toward a low cabinet. "That obvious?" Her tendrils rippled again, the equivalent of a knowing smile. "It is always obvious." She poured something dark and steaming into 2 shallow bowls, placing one before him. He accepted it carefully, letting the scent, something floral, earthy, wash over him. He barely had time to take a sip before the front entrance slid open. Nathan turned as 3 figures stepped inside. Tall Velithari, their robes adorned with intricate gold patterns. Their eyes locked onto him instantly. His muscles tensed. These weren't random visitors. Their posture, the deliberate way they moved, suggested authority. His gut whispered that something was wrong. One of them, a male with high cheekbones and an air of quiet command, addressed the elderly woman. "Matriarch Elia." She dipped her head in acknowledgement, then gestured toward Nathan. "This one has shown great honor." Nathan's grip tightened around the tea bowl. "Something tells me I just stepped into something complicated." The tallest of the newcomers regarded him carefully before speaking. "You have rendered aid to the matriarch." "Yeah," Nathan said slowly. "Didn't realize that was a crime." A faint flicker of amusement crossed the Velithari's face. "It is no crime. It is a binding." The air in the room shifted. Nathan felt it in his bones, the weight of unspoken truths closing in. The matriarch turned fully to him, hands folded in a gesture of quiet finality. "By lifting my burden you have honored our ways. By walking beside me you have sealed the path." Nathan's pulse ticked up. "What path?" Another of the newcomers, this one female, sharp-eyed, spoke. It is an oath woven into our history. A tradition of guardianship and kinship. Nathan set the tea down carefully. I don't follow. The matriarch exhaled softly, something almost like sympathy in her expression. By our law, by our custom, you have claimed a bond. Silence stretched between them, thick as gravity. Nathan's voice came out slow, measured. What kind of bond? The answer landed like a missile to his chest. You are to marry my granddaughter. His heart stuttered. The room was too warm. The walls pulsed too brightly. The tea he had barely touched suddenly felt like a terrible decision. He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. No. That's not. I just helped you carry some bags. The female elder tilted her head. Among our people, such an act is not small. It is a declaration. Nathan exhaled sharply. A declaration of what? The matriarch met his gaze without hesitation. Commitment. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to fix this, to find the right words that would make this go away. But the eyes watching him, steady, knowing, told him there was no simple exit. He had stepped into something ancient, something that would not bend for ignorance. And then, just as he opened his mouth to argue, another voice cut through the room. A new figure stood in the doorway, arms crossed, golden eyes burning with irritation. You've got to be kidding me, she muttered. Nathan knew immediately, this was the granddaughter. And judging by the look on her face, she wasn't any happier about this than he was. He said. The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire ready to snap. Nathan stared at the woman now standing in the doorway, and she stared back, arms folded, expression unreadable except for the flicker of something sharp in her golden eyes. Annoyance, maybe disbelief. Whatever reaction he had expected from the granddaughter he had apparently just been bound to, it wasn't this. She was tall, her violet-tinged skin darker than her grandmother's, her frilled tendrils shorter and more rigid. There was something severe about her posture, a quiet tension in the way she held herself, as if she had been prepared for a fight but arrived to find a farcical misunderstanding instead. You've got to be kidding me, she repeated, stepping fully into the room. Her gaze flicked to her grandmother, then to the elders, and finally back to Nathan. Tell me this is a joke. The matriarch exhaled softly. It is tradition. The younger woman made a sound, half scoff, half sigh, and ran a hand down her face before turning to Nathan with a look that was somewhere between exhausted patience and sheer disbelief. Do you even know what you've done? I carried some bags, Nathan said, struggling to keep his tone even. Apparently that was a mistake. Her frills twitched in irritation. A mistake? Do you have any idea how old this custom is? How serious? Believe me, Nathan said, jaw tight, I'm starting to get the idea. The tallest elder cleared his throat. This is a sacred union, bound by honor and witnessed by the people. It is not lightly undone. Nathan rubbed his temples. Right. And let me guess, there's no way out. The matriarch tilted her head, studying him with the quiet patience of someone who had already decided the outcome. There are ways. At that, the granddaughter's eyes snapped to her grandmother. What? The bond must be honored, the matriarch said, unshaken. But there are trials. If he is unworthy, if he falters, then the path will be undone. Nathan narrowed his eyes. Trials. The granddaughter groaned, rubbing the bridge of her nose. Of course. Because why make anything simple? Nathan exhaled sharply, hands on his hips. All right. Fine. I'll do whatever trial you throw at me. But first I want to know. He turned to her, the woman he was supposedly bound to. What do you want? She blinked, her expression briefly unreadable. Then after a pause she let out a slow breath and met his gaze head-on. I want my life back. Something about her tone caught him off guard. It wasn't just irritation, it was something deeper, heavier. Resignation maybe. She hadn't chosen this any more than he had. Nathan nodded. Then we're on the same side. The matriarch watched them both for a moment before finally inclining her head. Then it is agreed. You will undertake the trials. Nathan wasn't sure what he had just signed up for, but as the granddaughter, his supposed betrothed, stepped forward, arms still crossed, he figured he'd find out soon enough. Outside, the sky had deepened into the cool twilight hues of Velithar Prime, the bioluminescent city humming quietly beneath it. He followed her out of the dwelling, falling into step beside her as they wove through the narrow streets. So, he said, glancing at her. Are you at least going to tell me your name? She shot him a sideways look as if debating whether he deserved to know. Then with a sigh she relented. Sayla. Nathan, he offered. I know. He smirked slightly. Not thrilled about this either, huh? She stopped abruptly, turning to face him. You don't get it. This isn't just about me. Nathan frowned. Then what is it about? Sayla exhaled, glancing away. For the first time her confidence wavered just slightly. My family. Bar standing. You being here, this bond, it puts pressure on us. People are watching. If you fail it'll be a disgrace. And if you succeed. She trailed off, her expression shadowed. Nathan studied her carefully. Then what happens? She hesitated, then shook her head. It doesn't matter. You won't succeed. Nathan arched a brow. You sound pretty sure about that. She started walking again and he followed, waiting for an answer. It came after a long moment, quiet but certain. Because I'm going to make sure you don't. Nathan wasn't sure what he had expected from the trials, but standing at the edge of a narrow winding bridge suspended over a chasm of swirling violet mist hadn't been on his list. The structure stretched impossibly far, the other side obscured by the low-hanging glow of bioluminescent vines. The bridge itself was ancient, its stone path cracked and uneven, held together by threads of pulsing energy that flickered uncertainly beneath his boots. Beside him, Sayla stood with arms crossed, golden eyes glinting in the low light. She had barely spoken since leading him here, but the hint of a smirk on her lips told him she wasn't concerned about his chances. If anything, she was waiting for him to fail. Any last-minute advice? Nathan asked, shifting his weight. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and something metallic, a faint charge in the atmosphere that made the hair on his arms stand on end. Sayla exhaled, tilting her head slightly. Don't fall. Nathan gave her a dry look. Helpful. She shrugged, the soft glow of her frilled tendrils shifting with the movement. This is the first trial. It tests balance, endurance, and she gestured toward the bridge as a section of it crumbled into the abyss with a low, echoing crack. Your ability to not die. Nathan sighed, rolling his shoulders. All right, let's get this over with. He took a cautious step forward, feeling the stone beneath his feet shift slightly. Another step. Then another. The bridge groaned under his weight but held. So far so good. Sayla followed, moving effortlessly as if she had done this 100 times before. Nathan focused on his footing. The further they went, the more unstable the path became. Some stones were loose, others missing entirely, leaving gaps he had to jump across. The energy threads holding everything together pulsed erratically as if aware of his presence. Then the wind picked up. It wasn't natural. Not a simple gust but a force that pushed, shifting the bridge, sending tremors through the ancient structure. Nathan staggered, arms out to steady himself as a gust nearly sent him over the edge. Sayla barely reacted. You're doing great, she said, her tone far too casual. Nathan grit his teeth. You sound disappointed. She stepped onto a narrow section ahead of him, pausing to glance back. Maybe. Another gust slammed into them. Nathan dropped to one knee, gripping the rough stone. He had the distinct feeling the trial wasn't just testing his physical balance. It was testing his presence, responding to him in ways he didn't fully understand. Sayla watched, unimpressed. This isn't even the hard part. Nathan forced himself up. Oh good. I was hoping it'd get worse. She turned away, continuing forward with the confidence of someone who knew the path, who understood its tricks. And in that moment, Nathan realized she wasn't struggling because she had no intention of failing. Because if he failed, the bond would break. And she wanted that. The wind surged again. This time it carried something with it. A whisper, faint but unmistakable. Turn back. Nathan froze. The voice wasn't Sayla's. It wasn't the wind. It was something else, woven into the very fabric of the trial. He could feel it pressing at the edges of his mind, an unseen force testing him, searching for hesitation. Sayla had already moved further ahead. He didn't look back. Nathan swallowed hard and kept going. The last stretch of the bridge was barely intact. Only narrow floating stones remained, suspended by threads of flickering energy. Sayla crossed them with ease. Nathan hesitated. The distance wasn't impossible, but one misstep and he'd be lost to the abyss below. He took a breath. Then he jumped. The first stone held. So did the second. The third wobbled under his weight, but he pushed off before it could vanish beneath him. One more. He leapt, and the stone cracked midair. For a split second he was weightless. Then a hand shot out, grabbing his wrist in a vice grip. Sayla. She held him there, her expression unreadable, her golden eyes locked onto his. For a moment neither of them spoke. The wind howled around them, but her grip didn't falter. Then with a small sigh, resignation, maybe even frustration, she pulled him up. Nathan landed on solid ground, chest heaving. He looked at her, searching her face for any sign of why she had done it. Sayla held his gaze for only a second before looking away. "Don't get any ideas," she muttered. "You still have 2 trials left." Nathan exhaled a dry laugh, rubbing his wrist. But something had shifted. And for the first time since this all began, he wasn't sure either of them truly knew how it would end. 2 of 2. Nathan had barely caught his breath before the next trial began. The bridge had tested his endurance and balance, but this was different. The air itself felt heavier here, charged with something unseen, something that curled around the edges of his senses like a whisper he couldn't quite hear. They stood at the entrance of a cavern, its walls smooth and dark, humming with veins of faintly glowing energy. The passage narrowed ahead, vanishing into the unknown. Sayla remained silent beside him, her expression as unreadable as ever, but something in the way she stood, rigid, wary, told him that this trial wasn't just difficult. It was dangerous. "What now?" Nathan asked, breaking the silence. Sayla hesitated as if debating how much to tell him. "The Trial of Shadows." Nathan arched a brow. "That sounds ominous." She didn't disagree. Instead she turned to him fully, her gaze sharp. "This one isn't just about physical ability. It's about your mind. Your strength to face what you fear." Nathan frowned. "So what, this place gets in my head?" "The shadows do," she corrected. "They'll take form. They'll twist your thoughts, make you see things that aren't real. If you let them, they'll break you." Nathan let out a slow breath. "Great. Love that." Sayla studied him for a long moment. Then finally she stepped forward. "Stay close." He followed her into the cavern. At first there was nothing but the sound of their footsteps, their breathing. The glow from the walls pulsed softly, casting elongated shadows that wavered with each movement. The deeper they went, the dimmer the light became, until it was little more than an occasional flicker, barely illuminating the path. Then the whispering started. Nathan stopped. The air felt colder, the hairs on the back of his neck rising as the whispers slithered through the darkness. They weren't words, not exactly, but they held meaning, pressing against his thoughts like fingers trying to pry open a locked door. Sayla didn't react. She kept moving, but her shoulders were tense. Nathan swallowed and took another step. A shadow flickered at the edge of his vision. He turned sharply, heart hammering, but there was nothing there. Just stone. Another whisper curled around his mind. This time it had form. A voice, low, familiar. "You don't belong here." Nathan exhaled, shaking his head. "Nice try." The whisper deepened. "You're a fool. She wants you to fail." His chest tightened, but he forced himself to keep walking. "Yeah, I already figured that one out." The cavern shifted. The shadows thickened, writhing along the walls, pulling away from the stone as if detaching themselves. Then they moved. A shape formed ahead of him. A silhouette. Human. Nathan's breath caught. He knew that figure. Knew it down to his bones. His father. The man stood in the path, his expression obscured, but Nathan didn't need to see his face to feel the weight of his presence. "You were never enough." Nathan clenched his fists. "You're not real." The figure stepped closer. "Weak. Careless. Always running toward things you don't understand." Nathan forced himself to move forward. The figure didn't stop him. Vez watched. Then it was gone. The whispers didn't stop, but Nathan focused on Sayla's form ahead of him, on the rhythmic sound of her steps. She hadn't turned back, hadn't acknowledged the things lurking in the dark. She was pushing forward. So he did too. The path twisted, the cavern tightening around them. The darkness pressed closer, as if it had weight, as if it wanted something from him. Then Sayla stumbled. Nathan barely caught her before she hit the ground. For the first time she looked shaken. "What?" he started, but then he saw it. A figure stood before her. Not a shadow. Not an illusion. A woman. Regal. Frilled tendrils longer than Sayla's, draped in ceremonial cloth. Her golden eyes burned with something unspoken. Sayla's breath came shallow. No. Nathan looked between them. Who is she? Sayla's hands curled into fists. My mother. Nathan's stomach tightened. If the shadows had pulled her into this, it meant only one thing. This trial wasn't just his. It was hers too. The figure stepped forward. You are a disgrace. Sayla flinched. Nathan had never seen her react like that. She had been nothing but sharp edges and unshaken confidence since they met. But now she looked like someone standing on the edge of a cliff with nowhere to go. Nathan moved before he could think. He stepped between them. The shadow's golden eyes flicked to him. You cannot protect her from herself. Nathan held its gaze. Maybe not. But I'm not letting you break her either. The whispering surged, filling the cavern, the shadows pressing closer. Then light. It started small, just a pulse from the walls. Then another. The whispers faltered. The shadows recoiled. Sayla inhaled sharply, like she had just broken through the surface of deep water. The vision of her mother flickered, then vanished. The cavern fell silent. Nathan turned to Sayla. You okay? She looked at him, something unreadable in her eyes. Then she exhaled, steadying herself. We need to keep moving. She started forward. This time when Nathan followed, he walked beside her. The cavern's oppressive darkness had faded, but an unsettling stillness remained. Nathan and Sayla walked side by side, neither speaking, both keenly aware that whatever came next would be worse than the last trial. The air had a different weight to it now, not just heavy but charged with something ancient, something watching. Nathan glanced at Sayla. She still hadn't fully recovered from what the shadows had shown her. Her shoulders were squared, her jaw tight, but there was something behind her golden eyes, something he hadn't seen before. Doubt. He wanted to say something, but the path ahead shifted. The walls widened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost to the darkness above. In the center, a single pedestal stood, carved from the same stone as the cavern. Resting atop it was a shimmering violet gemstone, pulsing faintly as if it were alive. Sayla exhaled sharply. Nathan frowned. That bad? She hesitated before answering. The trial of judgment. Nathan stared at the gemstone. And what exactly does it judge? Sayla didn't move closer. Worth. Nathan arched a brow. Whose? Her silence was answer enough. He stepped toward the pedestal, feeling the air shift around him. There was something about the gemstone. Something pulling, like an unseen force brushing against his mind. It wasn't hostile, not exactly, but it wanted something. Sayla remained where she was. If you fail this trial, the bond will be severed. Nathan's breath hitched. She had said it so matter-of-factly, as if she had already decided the outcome. He turned to her. That's what you want, isn't it? She didn't answer. Nathan looked back at the gemstone. So what do I do? Sayla finally stepped forward, her voice quieter now. Touch it. Nathan wasn't sure what he expected when his fingers brushed the stone, but the instant contact was made, his mind was yanked from his body. The chamber disappeared. He was standing somewhere else. A battlefield. Not just any battlefield. One littered with the ruins of ships, bodies scattered among scorched earth. The air reeked of burning metal and something acrid, something worse. Nathan's pulse pounded as he took in the scene, his gut twisting. Then he saw himself. A version of himself standing in the wreckage, older, hardened. His armor was battle-worn, his face marred by a long scar running from temple to jaw. But it wasn't the appearance that unsettled Nathan. It was the look in his own eyes. A figure lay at his feet. Sayla. Motionless. Nathan's breath came shallow. The vision of him, the older him, looked up. Stared straight at him. Then he spoke. This is where it ends. Nathan stumbled back. The battlefield blurred, the scene fracturing, but the words lingered, sinking deep. Then just as suddenly as it started, the vision collapsed. And he was back in the chamber, hands still on the gemstone. His pulse raced. His mind reeled. The meaning of what he had seen wasn't clear, but the weight of it sat heavy on his chest. Sayla was watching him. Nathan swallowed hard. What did you see? Her expression barely changed. Nothing. He exhaled. He was lying. The gemstone pulsed again. A voice, neither spoken nor heard but felt. Will you take the bond? Nathan hesitated. His heart was still pounding, the vision still fresh. If that was the future. If that was what lay ahead. But then he looked at Sayla. At the way she stood poised waiting. At the way she had pulled him from the bridge. The way she had faltered before the shadow of her mother. She wanted him to fail. Not because she hated him. Because she was afraid. Nathan turned back to the gemstone. His fingers tightened around it. I will. The chamber shuddered. The gemstone flared, the light consuming everything. Then everything went dark. Nathan's senses returned all at once. Light flooding his vision, the weight of solid ground beneath his feet. The air thick with something electric, something alive. He gasped, staggering back as the violet glow of the gemstone faded from his palm, its pulsing light now absorbed into his skin. A strange warmth coiled in his chest, not painful but present. Permanent. Sayla was staring at him. No, not staring, assessing. Her golden eyes, always sharp, now held something unreadable. Suspicion. Wariness. Maybe even disbelief. She had expected him to fail. Maybe she had even hoped for it. But he was still standing and the bond, whatever it was, had been sealed. He flexed his fingers, still feeling the lingering energy coursing through him. So, what now? Sayla's jaw tightened. Now you're bound. Nathan exhaled. Yeah, I got that part. But what does that actually mean? She hesitated. Not a good sign. Then finally, it means you are connected. To my family. To my house. Her words were careful, measured. You carry the bond mark now. Nathan's pulse quickened. Wait, bond mark. Sayla didn't respond right away, but his question had struck something because her expression flickered, just for a moment. He narrowed his eyes. You weren't expecting this, were you? Sayla lifted her chin. Few outsiders ever pass the trial of judgment. That's not an answer. She exhaled through her nose. The bond mark is a recognition of worth. A claim. Nathan frowned. A claim to what? She met his gaze. Me. Silence. Nathan's brain stalled. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, because what? He scrubbed a hand through his hair, trying to process. So let me get this straight. Because I passed your trial, I'm now, what? Engaged. Sayla's expression darkened. A bond mark is not a simple engagement. It is a declaration before the elders, before my people. She crossed her arms, the tension in her frame palpable. And it is not something that can be undone. Nathan stared. He had been through a lot since coming to this world. He had been dropped into insane trials, nearly drowned, chased by living shadows, and faced with terrifying visions of a future he didn't understand. But this might actually break him. He dragged a hand down his face. So what happens if I say no? Sayla's jaw tensed. You cannot. Nathan let out a hollow laugh. Of course I can't. Silence stretched between them again, thick with unspoken things. Finally, Sayla shifted. You were never supposed to make it this far. The admission was quiet but honest. The trials were meant to prove you unworthy. To free you from this. Nathan's chest tightened. And yet here we are. She didn't look away. Yes. Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair again. He wasn't sure what he had expected when he helped an old alien woman carry her bags, but it sure as hell wasn't this. His fate was sealed. And Sayla hated it just as much as he did. Nathan exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders as the weight of what had just happened settled into place. There was no going back. The bond mark pulsed beneath his skin, a constant reminder of the commitment he hadn't intended to make. Sayla stood a few steps away, arms crossed, gaze sharp, but beneath the cool exterior he could sense the tension. She hadn't wanted this either. He glanced at her. So what now? Do we throw a party? Have a ceremony? Or do we just awkwardly pretend this didn't happen and move on? Her expression didn't change. The elders will expect a formal recognition of the bond. Nathan huffed. Of course they will. He dragged a hand down his face, trying to piece together a plan, but the reality was he had none. He was on an alien world, bound to an alien woman with no way out. His life had officially spiraled out of control. Sayla shifted, golden eyes narrowing. You do not seem to grasp the severity of this. Nathan let out a dry laugh. Oh no, I grasp it just fine. I just don't see the point in panicking over something I can't change. He met her gaze. Can you? Her jaw tensed. She didn't answer. that told him everything he needed to know. Nathan sighed. Hey, fine. What's the next step? Sayla hesitated for only a moment before answering. We go to my family's estate. They will decide how to proceed. That didn't sound ominous at all. Nathan pushed a hand through his hair. Right. Let's get this over with, then. She gave a curt nod and turned, leading the way through the cavern's winding exit. Nathan followed, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in his gut. He had a bad feeling about this. By the time they emerged, the twin suns of Sayla's homeworld had begun their slow descent, casting long shadows across the landscape. The air was thick with the scent of alien flora, crisp and slightly sweet, but beneath it lingered something else, something metallic like a storm brewing in the distance. Sayla walked ahead, her movements controlled, precise. Nathan quickened his pace to match her. You don't seem too thrilled about going home, he observed. She didn't glance at him. My family values strength above all else. They will see this bond as a test. Nathan arched a brow. A test of what? She hesitated. Of whether you deserve to keep it. Nathan stopped walking. Wait, keep it. Sayla finally turned to face him, her golden eyes unreadable. The bond mark is a recognition of worth. But it can be challenged. Nathan stared at her. Let me guess, if I fail I lose more than just the bond? She didn't answer. His stomach sank. Nathan exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Well, that's just fantastic. Sayla studied him for a long moment before turning back toward the path. You should prepare yourself. Nathan followed, his pulse steady but his mind racing. He had stepped into something far bigger than he realized. And somehow he had the feeling things were only going to get worse. The estate loomed ahead, a sprawling structure of dark stone and towering pillars, nestled within the cliffs that overlooked the valley below. The architecture was imposing, designed to intimidate as much as impress. Nathan had seen alien grandeur before, but this wasn't just grandeur. This was a fortress. A statement. Sayla's family wasn't just important. They were powerful. Nathan adjusted his stance, squaring his shoulders as they approached the entrance. He wasn't sure what he had expected from Sayla's home, but something about the way she carried herself here, tense, guarded, told him this place held more than just memories. It held expectations. The guards at the gate barely spared her a glance before stepping aside. Nathan, however, was another story. Their eyes lingered on him, cold and appraising, but they said nothing. Sayla didn't slow. She led him through the great hall, past towering columns and intricate carvings that depicted scenes of battle and victory. The weight of tradition was heavy here, pressed into every stone, woven into every tapestry. At the end of the hall, a set of double doors loomed. Sayla hesitated just for a breath before pushing them open. Inside, a semicircle of figures waited. Elders. Nathan could tell immediately, these weren't just family members. They were rulers, decision-makers, the kind of people who didn't ask why, only what comes next. Their robes were adorned with sigils, their gazes sharp and assessing. Sayla's father sat at the center, his presence unmistakable. He had the same golden eyes as his daughter, but his were colder, calculating. Sayla stepped forward and inclined her head slightly. I have returned. Her father's gaze flicked to Nathan. With a bond mark. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. Nathan straightened under the scrutiny, keeping his expression neutral. He'd dealt with worse. Alien warlords, corrupt bureaucrats, the occasional bounty hunter. But this was different. This wasn't just politics or survival. This was personal. Sayla's father leaned forward slightly. You understand what this means? Nathan held his gaze. I'm starting to. A murmur rippled through the elders. Sayla's father studied him for a moment longer before speaking. Then you know it must be tested. Nathan's stomach tightened. He had a feeling this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. Sayla spoke before he could. The bond mark was earned. Her father's expression didn't change. Yet it remains unproven. Nathan exhaled. All right, he said, rolling his shoulders. Let's get to the point. What's the test? The silence that followed was heavier than it should have been. Then her father spoke. You will fight for it. Nathan went still. Sayla, to her credit, barely reacted. But he saw it, the faint tightening of her fingers, the flicker of something in her eyes. She already knew. Nathan sighed. Of course I will. Her father finally smiled. Good. Then let us begin. The arena was carved into the rock, an ancient battleground where generations had tested their worth. It was a place of judgment, of reckoning. The stone beneath Nathan's boots was worn smooth by centuries of combat, darkened by history. The walls rose high around them, encircling the space like silent spectators. But above, beyond the open roof, the twin suns burned, casting long shadows over the battlefield. Sayla stood beside him, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. But he could feel the tension radiating off her. This wasn't a simple test. It was a statement, to her family, to her people, to him. He exhaled, rolling his shoulders as he scanned the gathered crowd. Elders lined the upper walkways, their robes whispering in the breeze. Below, warriors stood in silent ranks, their gazes locked on him. Some watched with curiosity, others with thinly veiled disdain. And then across the arena his opponent stepped forward. Nathan had expected a challenge, but the figure before him was something else entirely. A behemoth. 7 feet tall, corded with muscle, moving with the lethal grace of a predator. His armor was minimal, meant to highlight his sheer power rather than protect him. His skin bore the markings of a seasoned fighter, scars etched into the deep gray of his flesh. Sayla inhaled sharply. They chose him. Nathan glanced at her. I take it that's bad? Her gaze hardened. That is Valen. He is the champion of our house. He has never been defeated. Nathan let out a slow breath. Of course he hasn't. Valen strode forward, his presence alone enough to command silence. He looked Nathan over, unimpressed. You do not belong here, he said, voice like grinding stone. Nathan smirked. Yeah, I get that a lot. Valen didn't smile. He simply tilted his head, considering. You bear the bond mark. But that does not mean you deserve it. Nathan shifted his stance. And let me guess, you're here to prove that? Valen nodded once. Yes. The crowd murmured, anticipation thick in the air. Above them, Sayla's father raised a hand. The trial is set, he declared. Victory will decide if the bond mark stands. His gaze settled on Nathan. Fail and you will leave this place in disgrace. Nathan exhaled. No pressure then. Sayla stepped closer, voice low. Be careful. He will not hold back. Nathan glanced at her, noting the rare flicker of concern in her expression. He gave a lopsided grin. Didn't think he would. Then the signal came. Valen moved like a storm, crossing the distance between them in a blink. Nathan barely had time to react before a massive fist slammed toward him. He twisted, narrowly avoiding the impact, the force of it sending dust and stones scattering. Valen was fast. Faster than anyone that size had a right to be. Nathan didn't wait. He pivoted, driving his own fist toward Valen's ribs, but it was like hitting a mountain. The champion barely flinched before retaliating, an elbow swinging toward Nathan's head. Nathan ducked, rolling to the side, keeping his movements fluid. He wasn't going to win by matching brute strength. He had to be smarter. Valen turned, golden eyes locking onto him. You run, he noted. Nathan smirked. I strategize. Valen lunged again, and this time Nathan was ready. He sidestepped at the last moment, catching the larger warrior off balance. With a sharp twist, he drove his knee into the back of Valen's leg, forcing him down a fraction. It wasn't much, but it was something. A flicker of amusement crossed Valen's face. Interesting. Then he moved again, faster, sharper. A knee drove toward Nathan's ribs, and he barely twisted in time to avoid a devastating impact. Pain lanced through his side as the edge of the strike caught him, sending him skidding back. Nathan gritted his teeth. He couldn't keep this up forever. Valen straightened, rolling his shoulders. You fight well. Nathan wiped a bit of blood from his lip. Thanks. You hit like a truck. Valen smirked. Then let us end this. He surged forward and Nathan knew, this was it. He had one chance. And he wasn't about to waste it. Nathan's heartbeat pounded in his ears as Valen surged forward, a force of sheer power and precision. The champion wasn't just strong, he was trained, methodical. Every movement had intent, every strike calculated to break him down. Nathan had no illusions about this fight. If he played by Valen's rules, he would lose. Badly. He needed to change the game. Valen's fist came fast, a blur of motion. Nathan twisted at the last second, feeling the air ripple past his cheek as the blow missed by mere inches. He used the momentum to slide low, kicking out at Valen's knee. The impact landed but barely staggered the larger warrior. Valen pivoted, using the missed strike to his advantage. His other arm snapped forward, and Nathan barely managed to block before the sheer force sent him reeling. His feet skidded against the stone, pain flaring in his arms. He gritted his teeth. "Alright, that one hurt." Valen didn't answer. He was already moving again. Nathan dodged, weaving through the strikes, forcing himself to stay light, unpredictable. He wasn't going to win in a contest of strength, but speed, that was something he could use. He let Valen press the attack, let him push forward, committing fully to his overwhelming offense. And then when the opening finally appeared, when Valen overextended by just a fraction, Nathan struck. A feint. A shift of weight. A sudden drop. Then he drove his elbow into Valen's ribs with everything he had. The impact wasn't enough to bring the champion down, but it staggered him. And that was all Nathan needed. He followed through, twisting into a brutal kick aimed at the side of Valen's knee. This time it did buckle, forcing the warrior down slightly. Nathan didn't hesitate. He surged upward, slamming his forearm into Valen's jaw with enough force to snap his head back. The crowd murmured. For the first time Valen looked surprised. Nathan took a step back, breathing hard. "Still think I don't belong here?" Valen exhaled, touching his jaw. Then slowly he grinned. "Perhaps." Then he lunged. Nathan barely had time to react before a massive hand caught him by the collar, yanking him forward with terrifying speed. He twisted, trying to break free, but Valen's grip was like iron. In the next breath, Nathan was airborne, flung across the arena. The impact hit like a freight train. Stone cracked beneath him, pain exploded through his back, and for a split second the world spun. Nathan gasped, forcing himself to move before the next attack could come. He rolled, ignoring the way his ribs protested, and barely avoided the heavy fist that crashed into the ground where he had just been. Dust and debris shot into the air. Nathan coughed, pushing himself up. His limbs ached, his muscles burned, but he wasn't done yet. He couldn't be. Valen straightened, watching him with that same unreadable expression. "You are tenacious," he admitted. Nathan smirked, wiping blood from his chin. "Yeah, humans are stubborn like that." The champion studied him for a long moment. Then without warning he took a step back. Nathan tensed, expecting another attack. But none came. Instead Valen inclined his head. "You have proven yourself." Silence stretched across the arena. The crowd shifted, murmuring in confusion. Sayla's father watched, his expression unreadable. Nathan blinked. "Wait, that's it." Valen nodded once. "I sought to test your worth. You have endured." Nathan exhaled, relief washing over him, only to be replaced by the realization that his body really hurt. Sayla stepped forward, golden eyes sharp as they met Valen's. "You acknowledge the bond?" Valen inclined his head again. "I do." Sayla's father remained silent for a moment longer before finally standing. "The trial is complete," he announced. "The bond mark stands." A final murmur swept through the onlookers before the verdict settled. Nathan let out a breath, his legs threatening to give out beneath him. He had won. Or, at the very least, he had survived. And somehow he had the feeling this was only the beginning. Pain settled into Nathan's bones like an old friend, each breath a reminder of the trial he had barely survived. His ribs throbbed, his muscles burned, but the weight of judgment had finally lifted. The bond mark stood. That meant he wasn't being thrown off the planet or executed in some ancient, honor-bound ritual. Small victories. Sayla walked beside him, her steps steady, her expression unreadable. They had barely exchanged words since the trial ended. Whether that was due to the weight of tradition or the presence of the ever-watchful elders, he wasn't sure. The corridors of the stronghold were quieter now, the echoes of the fight still lingering in the air. The warriors they passed regarded him with something different than before. It wasn't quite respect, not yet, but the open disdain had faded. He was no longer just an outsider. He was something else now. When they reached a private chamber, Sayla finally turned to him, her golden eyes scanning his face. "You should rest." Nathan smirked, wincing as the movement pulled at a bruised muscle. "I'll rest when I stop feeling like I got hit by a tank." She sighed, shaking her head. "You very nearly lost." "Yeah, but I didn't." Silence stretched between them. There was something else behind her gaze, something unreadable. You fought well, she admitted at last. Nathan let out a breath, leaning against the stone wall. So, what now? Sayla hesitated. Now the elders will deliberate. The bond mark has been upheld, but that does not mean our path will be easy. He frowned. Wait. I won the trial. What else is there to deliberate? She studied him for a long moment before speaking. You proved your resilience, but you are still an outsider. The elders will seek assurance that you can uphold the traditions of our house. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. Great. More test. Sayla's lips quirked slightly. You should not be surprised. He let out a dry chuckle. Yeah, I guess I should have seen that coming. The door behind them slid open abruptly and an elder stepped inside. Nathan recognized him, one of the council members who had watched the trial in silence. His gaze was piercing, measuring. The council has reached its decision, the elder announced. Sayla straightened. Nathan braced himself. You will be granted temporary status within our house, the elder continued. You will have time to prove yourself further. However, there is one condition. Nathan narrowed his eyes. What condition? The elder's expression did not change. You must complete the rite of honor. Only then will your place here be secured. Nathan glanced at Sayla, but her face was unreadable. That didn't bode well. He sighed. All right. What exactly is this rite of honor? The elder's gaze did not waver. You will find out soon enough. Nathan clenched his jaw, frustration creeping in. It seemed like every time he cleared one hurdle, another one appeared. But there was no turning back now. Sayla met his gaze, her expression unreadable. I will prepare you. Nathan exhaled, nodding. Whatever was coming, he would face it. One way or another. Nathan stood at the edge of the ceremonial platform, the weight of unseen expectations pressing down on him. The vast chamber hummed with quiet energy, torches casting flickering shadows against the ancient stone walls. Sayla stood a few steps away, her posture composed, but he could sense the tension coiled beneath her calm exterior. The rite of honor is not a simple tradition, she said, voice low. It is a test of will, of commitment. Many warriors train years before undertaking it. Nathan exhaled, rolling his shoulders. His body still ached from the fight with Valen, but he wasn't about to show weakness now. And I get what, an hour's notice? Sayla's lips quirked slightly, though there was no humor in her eyes. You asked what happens next. Now you know. The doors on the far side of the chamber groaned open, and a procession of elders entered, their robes trailing against the stone floor. At their center walked Sayla's father, his expression a mask of unreadable authority. The rite begins now, he announced, his voice carrying through the hall. Nathan of Earth, step forward. Nathan hesitated for the briefest moment before moving. Each step echoed in the silence. He stopped before the elders, standing tall even as uncertainty gnawed at him. Sayla's father regarded him with cold scrutiny. To stand among us, to honor the bond mark, you must complete the rite as all who came before you have done. There will be no intervention. No assistance. Nathan nodded, jaw tightening. Understood. The elder studied him for a moment longer before lifting a hand. Then begin. The floor beneath Nathan trembled. A deep, grinding noise filled the chamber as hidden mechanisms shifted into place. Before him, the stone parted, revealing a darkened descent. A passageway leading somewhere unknown. Sayla's voice was barely a whisper. Be careful. Nathan glanced at her before stepping forward. There was no turning back now. As he descended into the darkness, the sounds of the chamber above faded, replaced by the rhythmic drip of water and the faint echo of his own breathing. The air grew colder, carrying the scent of earth and something older, something untouched by time. Then he saw the carvings. Ancient symbols, etched into the walls, their meanings lost to time. Some looked like warnings. Others, depictions of figures standing before monstrous shapes, their arms raised in either defiance or surrender. Nathan kept moving. The passage narrowed, forcing him to press forward carefully. Then, without warning, the ground beneath his feet shifted. He lunged, barely catching himself as the floor gave way to a pit of jagged stone. His heart pounded as he steadied himself against the wall. All right. So that's how it was going to be. Drawing a slow breath, he found his footing and moved forward, each step cautious. The air grew heavier, charged with something unseen. The deeper he went, the more he felt it, an awareness pressing against the edges of his mind. Then he reached the chamber. It was vast, its ceiling lost in the shadows. At its center stood a pedestal upon which rested a single object. A blade, its metal unlike anything he had ever seen. It pulsed faintly as if alive. Nathan stepped forward. The moment his fingers brushed the hilt, the ground trembled and the chamber roared to life. Something was waking up. And it was not pleased.